Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, the President gave a beautiful speech on global warming. He said that the world's coming to an end, and if we don't act, it's our moral obligation to make sure our planet is saved for future generations, and that it's all up to us. And to be successful, we must regulate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. For more than a decade, environmentalists have been pressuring Democrats to do this and have been pressuring all of us to do this, and we all know why. I can remember years ago, and this would have been back when I was in the House, my first observation was when I looked at liberals in the House, I said there are 4 flawed premises on which they base their decisions. One was, and I'm going from memory now, this is many years ago, one was that the Cold War's over, we no longer need a defense. Another one was that deficit spending is not bad public policy. A third one, punishment's not a deterrent to crime. And the fourth one, and this is the big one, is that government can run our lives better than people can. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. The reason they've been wanting to do this with regulating carbon, I think is better articulated by a guy that I don't think anyone will argue could be the most knowledgeable scientist in America. His name is Richard Lindzen with MIT. And he said, and his quote was that regulating carbon is a bureaucrat's dream. If you regulate carbon, you regulate life. You control life. And that's what bureaucrats want to do. And that's what the environmentalists want to do in controlling our lives. They want to determine what cars we drive, what kind of houses we live in, how our cities are built, and all of that. And they can do all of this by regulating carbon dioxide. And Democrats, particularly in the Senate, have been unsuccessful in passing legislation to accomplish this. This is the key. It was way back during the Kyoto Convention, and that was during the Clinton administration, when Al Gore came back and he said, well, we need to pass and ratify the Kyoto Convention. The Kyoto Convention would do exactly that. It would allow us in this country and around the world to regulate carbon emissions. Now, if they do this, they're able to control the lives. This was way back 13 years ago that this was taking place. So anyway, they started trying to pass legislation. The first one actually was not necessarily a Democrat bill. It was McCain-Lieberman, and it was one that was a cap-and-trade bill. And quite frankly, at that time, the Republicans were a majority, and I chaired the committee called Environment and Public Works. And so I was on the floor managing the opposition to that particular cap-and-trade bill. That was a carbon control bill. And we won. And the years went by, and we continued to win over and over again. So I guess what I'm saying is the reason the president's doing this right now is because he can't get it done by anyone who's accountable to the people. He can't get it done through legislation, so he's trying to do it through regulation. So, and the most recent one was 2009, the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade bill. And by the way, I congratulate Senator Markey for winning that election. It's going to be fun for us because we've debated each other and on this issue now for years and years. Now we're in the same chamber. But the bottom line was, in 2009, they did pass that in the Democrat-controlled House, and it came over, and of course it was not even considered in the Senate. So it would have regulated only the largest emitters. This is the hardest thing to get across to people, because everyone understands after 12 years of repetition and listening to me at this podium say it over and over again, that if we were to pass any kind of a cap and trade, the cost to the American people would be somewhere between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, the reason I say that, the Wharton School came out and they came up with a figure around $350 billion. MIT came out with a figure about the same. So no one debated that for 10 years. The cost of regulating through cap and trade would have been somewhere around $300 to $400 billion. Now, as onerous as I think all these bills were trying to do this by legislation, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad as what's happening today for this reason. It gets into the weeds here, but it's important that we in this body understand what this is all about. Because the bills that we killed, that would have cost $400 billion a year would have regulated only the largest emitters, those emitters that emitted 25,000 tons of CO2 a year. And it would have cost the economy $400 billion. Now, we rejected it, and we all know that's what the cost of it is. But because the president owes this environmental base, and he can't pass it in legislation, he's now taking unilaterally regulatory action to regulate greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. Now, keep in mind, this is not one of the bills that we had defeated, because that would have only caused the emission control on those entities that emitted 25,000 tons of CO2 or more in a period of a year. But if it's done by regulation, then it has to be done under the Clean Air Act. The significance of this is this would not just go after the big emitters. It wouldn't go after just the big those who emitted 25,000 tons a year. It would catch people and individuals in organizations that emitted 250 tons. That's 250 tons as opposed to 25,000 tons. That means that would apply not just the large emitters like power plants, but every refinery, oil and gas well, every manufacturing facility, every plastics plant, the iron smelters, steel mills, every apartment building, churches, every school. And so that's everybody. And so one thing that's never been calculated is what the cost of that would be. Because if the cost of just those emitting 25,000 tons would be $400 billion a year, then how much would it be if you apply that to everybody all the way down to 250 tons? You know, I do something in Oklahoma each year. I get the total number of people who file federal tax returns, and I kind of do the math. So I'll take the amount of a tax increase, in this case, let's use $400 billion a year. And I say, how much would this cost the average family in my state of Oklahoma that files a tax return? And it works out $3,000 a year. So we're talking about a major tax, by far the largest tax increase that this country has ever seen. So don't let the president fool you into believing that he'll stop at the power plants. He is at an all-out war against fossil fuels and affordable energy. And legally, if he goes down this path, he will not be able to stop just at the large ones. This will apply to everybody out there under the Clean Air Act, and that would be those emitting 250 tons. And he's doing it unilaterally just for the United States. If you believe that man is causing global warming, now I don't, but if you believe that, then you should be concerned about worldwide emissions. Because who cares? It's not what's happening just in the United States of America. It's all over the world. That's where the problem, if there's a problem, would be. If all we do is lower our emissions without convincing China and India, Mexico, and other countries to do the same, then the United States manufacturers out seeking the energy to run their operations would have to leave the United States and go to those other countries where they don't have regulations. So it had the effect actually of increasing, not decreasing emissions. I remember when Lisa Jackson was the director of the EPA. She was my favorite liberal. I used to identify, I had three favorite liberals. She's one of the three of them. And I liked her because even though I disagreed with her philosophically, she was always honest with me. I'd ask her a question and she'd answer it. And I remember when I asked her the question live on TV in a hearing, I said that, you know, if we were to pass any of this legislation that would regulate CO2 levels, would this reduce emissions worldwide? She said no, because this only affects the United States, and it would not affect the other countries. So that's you won't hear the president talking about this. You won't hear him talking about the cost, even though they will shrink from our economy by more than $400 billion a year. We know that. No one refutes that. It requires the EPA to hire an additional 230,000 employees and spend an additional $21 billion to implement the regulatory regime. And these are not my figures. These are the EPA's figures. And you won't hear him talking about it because he knows it's a losing argument. In fact, the day before the president gave his speech, he had his campaign send out talking points to all of the activists that he has working in his behalf. They told them exactly, they, being the White House, told these people exactly what to talk about, what to say, and exactly what not to say. Now, we recovered this. We found that this is the talking points that the president sent out to people, so America would be, this is what they'd be listening to. And I think it's worthwhile for us to go over this right now. On this first chart, you have his overarching three-point strategy. Point number one is we have an obligation to act. The memo continues, we have a moral obligation to future generations to leave them a planet that's not polluted and damaged by carbon pollution. Now notice they're not talking about climate change anymore, and they're not talking about global warming. The new word that they're using now is carbon pollution. All the same thing, but global warming didn't work, so they discontinued that. They tried climate change, that didn't work. Now the new word, so you'll probably hear it for a while till it's replaced. It's called carbon pollution. Their talking points. This is the president's talking points, and I think this kind of wordsmithing is actually smart. I compliment them on going to professionals and seeing what kind of words they can use to make the public believe something that isn't true. Now, the second thing that they have charged would be that communities all over America are already being harmed. The memo continues, and I'm quoting now from the memo. It says, climate change, this is on the second point up here. Climate change is already harming Americans all over the country. Cleaning up after climate-driven disasters last year cost the average taxpayer over $1,100. Or cost taxpayers nearly $100 billion, one of the largest non-defense discretionary budget items since 2012. Now, these are the words coming from the White House for people to use in their talking points. These figures come from the total cost of all natural disasters. Now, I'm from Oklahoma. I think we all know that we have tornadoes in Oklahoma. And we've had tornadoes as long as I've been, the years I've been living in Oklahoma, all my life. And of course, that has nothing to do with this. So he's talking about that figure on all natural disasters. That has nothing to do with carbon whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense to attribute every single natural disaster and its total cost to global warming or carbon pollution, as the president now says, even if you believe global warming is true. So the third point, the president's talking points were to the president's climate plan is full. This is what the president is telling his followers in this body and elsewhere to do. So the president's climate plan is full of common sense solutions, including first ever limits on carbon pollution from power plants. The memo continues. That's why we applaud President Obama's, this is what Obama wants us to say about him. That's why we applaud President Obama's climate plan, which is full of common sense solutions, starting with his call for the EPA to limit the carbon pollution from power plants, while we set limits and they say further, while we set limits for arsenic, mercury, and lead, we let power plants release as much carbon pollution as they want. It's time to set a limit on pollution that affects public health, and that's why it's so important that the president is rising to this challenge. Those are his talking points he wants people to say about his speech and about his program. Now, what this demonstrates to me is that the president is no longer fighting greenhouse gases, which he says cause global warming, but is instead fighting against carbon pollution. But if carbon pollution is simply carbon dioxide or CO2 and it's dangerous to our health, what are we going to do about the air that we breathe? Don't we emit CO2 every time we exhale? Is this the pollution that they're talking about? Also in the memo, the president's alarmists are given a concrete list of things to talk about and things not to talk about. This is something that we received just a few hours ago, and we're very pleased to be able to get a copy of it. This was only supposed to go to alarmists. Alarmists, for the benefit of my colleagues, are people who believe the world's coming to an end and it's all man's fault. So it says what to do and what not to do. Just look at this. That's just amazing on what you can say and what you can't say. We'll highlight just a few. The first point is the instruction to not talk about the cost of regulations. The memo says, and you can read it right there, this came from the White House, don't lead with straight economic arguments. Why? because global warming legislation will cost between $300 and $400 billion a year, and the regulations will cost much, much more than that. Charles Rivers Associates. Now, I think that's a credible group that no one has challenged, to my knowledge, their credibility since they've been in existence. In their study of the Waxman-Markey bill, reported that the policies would cost the economy $350 billion a year in 2030 and $730 billion a year in 2050. Again, we go back to the figures that's consistent with what the Wharton School 10 years before and MIT came out with. The Heritage Foundation. They said that the average family would see its direct energy costs rise by over $24,000 in the first 20 years following the bill's enactment. Now, this is the Heritage Foundation saying how it's going to affect every family, the average family in America. The cost will be far higher under the president's unilateral regulatory actions that are bypassing Congress because they're talking about regulating down to a much lower emissions level. The memo also instructs, now we're talking about this memo right here that came out to the alarmists to use to support the president. The memo also instructs the president's alarmists to talk about his actions being, quote, the latest in a series of steady and responsible steps the administration has taken, unquote, to combat global warming. In that vein, however, the memo instructs them to not overstate the magnitude of the action being taken. In other words, the president does not want his people talking about this being the first of many steps in regulating every refinery, manufacturer, oil and gas well, steel mill, plastics, and all of this. He doesn't want them to talk about that. The next memo instructs alarmists to, quote, discuss the impacts. Carbon pollution is bad for the health of our kids and our planet, but do not debate the validity of the consensus of the science that has already been settled. Well, in other words, don't debate the science, just say it's been settled, because we have more and more and more people now questioning the science, and it's far from being settled. So they don't want to bring that up. They don't want people talking about that. Well, the science is far from settled, and since when does carbon dioxide, which we all breathe on every day, hurt our kids? The memo also instructs alarmists to, and this is a quote from his memo, you're looking at it here, inform audiences about the nature of the problem, who is at fault, and what can be done. But do not, quote, debate the increase in electricity prices. Instead, pivot to health and clean air messages. In other words, don't admit the truth. That is active unilateral regulation will do nothing more than increase electricity prices and unilaterally shut down our economy by imposing EPA regulations on every single industry and dramatically expand the federal government's role in our lives. Now, this is all instructions coming from the White House without doing anything to reduce global emissions. Now, this is why I've got to repeat this at this time. If we do all this stuff, if it were done by legislation or by regulation, we know that it's not, we've already shown clearly, it will not reduce CO2 emissions, even if that were your goal, if you wanted to do it, because that's what the administrator, Obama's administrator of the EPA said. In answer to the question, is this going to reduce CO2 emissions? He said, no, it won't. And I've already covered that. And also that this is Richard Lindzen and other scientists have talked about this is the bureaucrat's dream. If you control carbon, you control life. So keep that in mind. You have all this effort is being made, and we've made it very clear that it's not going to accomplish anything that they want to accomplish in terms of reducing CO2 emissions worldwide. The last thing I'll mention from the memo is that it says to, quote, discuss modernizing and retooling power plants and innovation that will create green jobs, but do not, quote, try to suggest net job increases. In other words, don't mention that this is going to shut down every coal, oil, and eventually a natural gas power plant that we have in this country and kill thousands of jobs at manufacturers around the nation. We don't want to talk about the job loss. The president only wants to talk about the benefits of his regulatory actions and not about the costs. But what we have to remember is that even the benefits are false and overstated because they do not rely on the true cost of the regulations. But we should not be surprised, this coming from the administration that thinks that more regulations means more jobs. These are talking points, but the mechanics of these new and future EPA greenhouse gas rules will be done by the EPA. Gina McCarthy right now, and that's the reason I'm here today, is to, first of all, demonstrate the speech that he made and how that relates now to the current EPA and perhaps the confirmation hearing, the confirmation vote that will be coming up. Gina McCarthy is currently being considered to take the top job at the agency. And then remember, I said that Lisa Jackson had that job before and how much I thought of her. Well, I like Gina. I like her very much. I've worked with her. She has had a different job for several years, and that is she was the assistant director of the EPA for air issues. But that's the reason. It's very important that people understand what we're looking at. We have a good personal relationship, but she's one of the one who's responsible for all of the worst regulations that have come from the EPA in the last 4 years under Lisa Jackson's leadership. Lisa Jackson was director, but Gina McCarthy was the air director. And it's from the Air Office, the Assistant Administration for Air, where she has the most expertise, and that all of the worst regulations will come in the future. After President Obama's speech on global warming, it became clear that Gina McCarthy will be used as the tool of the administration for all of these regulations that will destroy the American economy. In the last 4 years, we've had Utility MAC. I've listed these up here. It's really worth looking at. Utility MAC. The MAC means the maximum achievable control technology. That is, what technology is out there to control the emissions. And so a utility MAC would cost and she was able to get that through $100 billion, 1.65 million jobs lost. Next thing they're able to get the boiler MAC, that's $63.3 billion and 800,000 jobs lost. Regional haze, another regulation regulating the air, will increase the cost of Oklahoma's electricity bills by over $1.8 billion. And these are all figures that are incontrovertible. People don't disagree with them. In the next few years, even worse regulations are likely to come out. Greenhouse gas regulations may be the worst, but there's also the others that are being listed here. You have the greenhouse gas, that's one we've been talking about, but you also have the ozone NAAQS regulations. The adjustments to that rule could put 2,800 counties out of attainment, including all of them in Oklahoma. We have 77 counties in my state of Oklahoma. I can remember when I was mayor of Tulsa, they came out with new regulations that put Tulsa County out of attainment. Now, when you're out of attainment, that means you kiss any energy development, new manufacturing opportunity, or any other business expansion goodbye. They won't be able to get a permit from the EPA. Now, Gina McCarthy is in the face of President Obama's over-regulatory agenda that is threatening our energy independence and putting our economic future in peril. We can't allow these regulations to move forward, and I think the key to that is the person who is responsible for all the regulations, all the costs, all the jobs that I just enumerated, both during her tenure as the air boss of EPA, and then these that would come in the future. That would be her go. She would be the tool that is being used by the administration. And we know that yesterday was kind of interesting because Heather Zeichel, I believe is the way you pronounce her name, she was the one who had Carol Browner's job as the czar. What kind of czar was she? The climate change czar. And she was on the Hill, huddling in a secret meeting with some of the chief alarmists, like Barbara Boxer and some of the rest. I've got the long list here, but I won't bother. In the meeting, they talked about the president's plan and presumably this memo with wordsmithing talking points from the memo we talked about before. So the one that we had up before is the same thing that they talked about yesterday. This is how you're going to have to word all this stuff. Their goal is not to protect the American people, it is to control them. They want top-down control, and carbon dioxide regulations will give them this to them. And their talking points memo proves that they are doing all they can to craft their message in a way that convinces Americans that they are not trying to crush our economy, but instead trying to help. But the truth is their regulatory agenda will only cause more unemployment, lower economic growth, and lower take-home pay for the American people. You know, President Obama delivered a beautiful speech, global warming. That's how I started this little talk, and it was beautiful. It was well thought out, and he is very gifted. He had a beautiful speech, and he's embarking on the most devastating surge in regulation that will cost hardworking Americans millions of jobs and tax increases. Put the chart up again on the cost there. Do you have that? Yeah, of the tax increases to accomplish nothing. Keep in mind, if you do all these things, it's not going to lower CO2 emissions. We've got that. That is proved. No one has denied it. And that even came from the administrator of the EPA. And it's going to be devastating to the American people. And so this is the big thing. It has a lot to do with the confirmation hearing of the very fine lady that's been a good friend of mine for a long time, but the one who is responsible for these air regulations that is killing jobs in America. And we can't let that happen. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.